Good afternoon. Everybody hear me good? Okay, as he said, my name is Russell Hedrick. I'm a first-generation farmer. So a little bit about our background and our story. Going into farming as first generation, I went to local farmers, asked them what I needed to be a farmer. First thing I was told was a 150 horsepower tractor and a 20-foot disc. Luckily, we were broke enough that we couldn't afford those tools. To give you an idea how we started in farming, the first tractor I had was a 50 horsepower Ford open station. I bought a 4-row 38-inch planter out of Iowa. I paid more to ship it from Iowa to me than I paid for the planter. That's kind of how we got into no-till. One of our initial worries, the first year I farmed, I leased 30 acres. That's what we started with. And we had a lot of winter erosion. We get about 35 inches of precip in the fall, about 10 inches through the rest of the summer. So in North Carolina, we're about 10 days away from a drought. And when I went to the NRCS office in Soil and Water, I met this crazy guy named Lee Holcomb. He kind of introduced me into cover crops, no-till, how we should go about starting our farm. And it just so happened there was a video that just came out that year called Undercover Farmers, if you've never seen it. And it had people like Jay Fuhrer, Gabe and Paul Brown. Had a lot of farmers from actually in my area, North Carolina. So that kind of gave us the I guess the confidence to go into farming. So this is where we call home. I'm in the western part of the state. So just to give you an idea, we're spread out about an hour and a half in a pickup truck. So the way that we farm is we pretty much plan our rotation at least a year, maybe 2 years in advance, whether it be covers, grazing. One of the things that, you know, whenever I started my journey into farming, what I didn't understand is if you grow corn and soybeans, they're there for 5 or 6 months. And then there's nothing. And I'm paying either a lease or taxes on that ground for 12 months. And for me, it just had to pencil. So we started figuring out how to stack operations. In 2013, Ray Archuleta told me about this crazy guy named Gabe Brown. And he's like, hey, you should call him up. And Ray Archuleta started talking about how I should mob graze my cattle and put, you know, 500,000 pounds per acre and, you know, graze them like buffaloes. And after about 30 minutes of Ray talking, he took a breath where I could talk. And so y'all have all spoken to Ray before. I appreciate that. You know, I told Ray, I said, I don't have any cows. And he's like, oh, you got to buy cows. So this is 2013, you know, sale barn cows are $2 a pound. And so we made the decision to go buy some, and we bought some cow-calf pairs. Some of them were called springers. I thought that's because they had calves in the spring. It was because they spring over the fence when you're going to work. A lot of valuable lessons for a first-generation farmer. So, you know, this is a picture of one of our neighbors. Our county is supposed to be one of the most progressive no-till counties in the state. But if you look at our river system called the Catawba River System, it's a 303D. For those of you who work for Soil and Water, you may know what that means, but it means we have full sediment from top to bottom in that river. And it's because everybody who's no-till went out and got a turbo till. You know, they're supposed to be these great things. So every year, you can see we've got some pretty good slopes on our ground. I send our neighbor a nice gift basket, a bunch of fruit, and a card, because every year they send us free topsoil and nutrients. Our fertilizer bill went down a whole lot faster than what we thought it would with covers. But you know, the thing of it is we started looking at, you know, this was from a no-till magazine, and it said the soil explodes off the blade upward and laterally. You know, I'm gonna make y'all work today. How many producers in the room? Just raise your hand if you're a producer. What's the most expensive input on your farm? It's fertilizer. 80% of the phosphorus that we're losing is because of that soil movement. You know, that doesn't make sense to me as a first-generation farmer, why I'm gonna pay $600 for a ton of DAP and then watch it all pretty much wash down onto my neighbor's farm, unless you have really good neighbors above you. You know, those aren't good practices. So this is what we look like in North Carolina. We all have people that have restless tillage syndrome. Doesn't matter what state you go to. We go out here, we bed it up in the fall. That's what it looks like all winter long. You know, why are we doing that? Why are we making these management decisions? And you know, I understand there's some crops that do require tillage. There's some vegetables and stuff, but besides those, you know, there's good enough equipment out there that we shouldn't be doing this anymore. This is our ditch banks. I heard Jeremy talk earlier about, you know, soil loss and what they showed on theirs. Does anybody know what the #1 commodity in the United States is that we export? It's topsoil. It's a train 117 miles long. I heard that this last January. You know, that's something that blew my mind, that we're losing that much topsoil a year. That was pretty crazy, because all the time in North Carolina, this is what we see. So life's hard, it's harder if you're stupid. My grandpa was a John Wayne fan, that's one of the things, think about what you're doing on your operation. If you're, there's times, I have the same issues you do. We've had 2 hurricanes this fall. From September until last week, we've had roughly about 36 to 40 inches of rain. When we've got out there and tried to drill a cover crop or harvest corn, I still get those same ruts. But instead of going and disking a whole field, we may disc a 4-foot, 5-foot wide strip, or we'll take a box blade and fill those ruts in. It's just the nature of farming, it's gonna happen. Everybody talks about the great North Carolina soils. Nobody ever says that. I've been fortunate enough speaking that I've been to places like Iowa, Illinois, Indiana. I've seen some of the soils here in North Dakota. I'm thinking about, trucking it back home and spreading it over our stuff. Maybe something would grow. But this is what we're farming. Most of the stuff that I farm in my county, to give you an idea, we have less than 10,000 acres of any agriculture land in my county now. We've got a bunch of golf courses, industrial parks, and typically what they do is they take the best farmland and they put a solar farm on it, or they either take it as a bar pit and strip all the topsoil off of it for a bridge project, and this is what you're left with. So this is where we started our farming operation. We started picking up ground that nobody wanted. Some of the stuff we didn't even pay rent on for the first couple of years because they couldn't get anybody to do anything with it. This is what our farms look like now after about 4 or 5 years. You can see a distinct line across here. This is a 16-inch sample, so about 8 inches deep. We're starting to see the soil change. This was about 3 years into farming. We started noticing earthworms coming back, some of the beneficials that we keep hearing about, the predator-prey relationship. And this is what it looks like after 7 years. We've got that deep, rich, they say like chocolate cake. We're starting to see a lot of porosity, water infiltration rates. To give you an idea, our native forest is about a ½ inch an hour. We're seeing anywhere from about 5 to 7 inches typically when we start doing these reduced physical disturbances and also integrating covers. So this is what the changes are. That's a pretty big difference. You can see where we were, even in a no-till system, in my belief, no-till doesn't work without covers. No-till is a good system to reduce that physical disturbance, but without the live living roots, no-till just doesn't work. And this is what we look at here. So, we're kind of like Lauren and the guys you've heard earlier. We've had a 600% increase in our CO2 respiration. We've had a 480% increase in our water extractable carbon and our soil health scores. We started at 5 to 8s. Now we've got some in the 40s, 50s, 60s. So we've had a pretty big change on those farms. If you don't, know who that young guy is right there, that was my first year farming. When we first started farming, we really didn't understand all the benefits of cover crops. We thought we were going to reduce winter weeds and we were going to reduce erosion. And then, this is where we started. If you've never planted into a cover crop before, this will give you anxiety. The stuff that I'm getting ready to show you later, you'll probably not sleep for a week. But we started out about our knees to our waist. Now we've got stuff that's 6, 7 foot tall. You can play hide and seek with a John Deere tractor in. This is where we're at now. We call this one the home run mix. This is pretty much a mix that we're shooting for the moon. This will go before corn. It's a mixture of cereal rye, triticale, oats, crimson clover, winter peas, vetch. We've even started using pollinators like Phacelia, and we'll put like rape or radish in there as well. So our farm is really data driven. I want to know what's going on my farm, so I've reached out to some universities, 2 of them being the University of Georgia and North Carolina State University. And we wanted to monitor water infiltration rates, when the nitrogen broke down in the cover crops and how long they were going to be available, and also the biomass that we were producing. So just some of the benefits that we saw was, a 70% increase in water infiltration rates after 3 years. Decreased water evaporation. One of the big things is I may get 40 inches of water in a year, but if I can't get it in the profile and I can't keep it there in the soil profile, then it's not going to be available to that crop. So we started monitoring just how much moisture. So on the bottom here, that's bare soil. You can see that the water is evaporating quicker. And then also where we had cover crops, we had more consistency. And then that's when we planted the crop, and then the crop started actually using it. We also started looking at nitrogen. Sometimes you can terminate a cover crop too early. Sometimes you can terminate it too late. The carbon to nitrogen ratio that we're finding out that works on our farm is about 40 to 1. If we go above that, we're tying nutrients up. If we go below that, we're releasing them too quickly before the crop needs them. So this is just some of the graphs, you know, where we terminated 4 weeks after termination. We had almost released all the nitrogen to that corn crop, and we don't need that until later in the season. So the only change we made is we terminated it about 3 weeks later, and we were actually able to hold a lot more of that nitrogen, about 47 more pounds of nitrogen, almost until tassel, just for that corn crop. So then we do check strips. My advice to any farmers, if you're gonna do something, do a check strip. This was corn. We planted this cover crop about November the 15th, and this is just purple dead nettle, henbit, chickweed. This is our fescue pastures of one of our neighbors in the back. Had we known the benefit of adding cattle to this farm at that time, then we would have let them rotationally graze that. This picture was taken about March the 5th, and it was about 36 inches tall on that farm. That's how deep that cover was. So we go out and do biomass samples just to know what we're putting out there, and then we do nutrient analysis. The way that I do it is I put it on a trailer, I let it dry. NRCS says you can put it in an oven and bake it that way. My district conservationist did that and almost got divorced because of the smell. I wouldn't advise that for the married men in the room. This one seems to work out pretty well. So to give you an idea, you know, what we're shooting for cover crops, if you've never had a nosebleed, you should get an open station tractor and roll down cereal rye at that height. You know, look at that mat. This right here was the first farm that I ever farmed without chemicals. You know, I'm not shooting to go organic. It's just something that we wanted to try. We waited until it was about June the 10th. This cereal rye here was about 6.5, 7 feet tall. We terminated it with a quarter gramoxone and got this cover crop dead, and then rolled this down and didn't use any other herbicides in that program. You know, if you remember that check strip, this is where the check strip was. The landlord's house used to face that way. They said that it was so ugly they didn't want to see it anymore, so we turned it. But we've suppressed Johnson grass, Palmer amaranth, mare's tail, pigweed, morning glories. There's been a ton of weeds that we've, you know, would have had to spray, you know, $10, $15, $20 an acre in chemicals. Now we don't. You can see our beans are on 20-inch rows. It was planted in the direction that the cereal rye was rolled. 7 weeks after planting, still no herbicides, no fungicides, no insecticides. This was in a D4 drought. We had 4 inches of rain from March until September that year during the growing season. I never understood, you know, farmers in the Midwest that are friends of mine that talked about, well, it's a tough year, we just haven't had any rain. You know, I was like, oh, it can't be that bad. Then I lived it. You know, we went out there and looked. We had full canopy. We did a field day. You can see where we bush hogged the beans down, just have a path around the field. Still didn't even get weeds breaking through that residue. You could go out there and move the beans apart. Still had really good cover crop cover. Pulling pigweeds. We had one farm that we were able to pick up our second year of farming that another farmer actually walked away for Roundup resistant weeds. We picked this farm up, went into a cover crop. In a 30-acre field, we picked 6 pigweeds. You know, that's our program now. Instead of spraying, we'll go out there and pull a couple weeds. It takes a half a day, and that's conventionally what we've been doing. So then we started trying new things. 2014, I went to Kansas, met Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, and he was talking to me about how bugs can't process sugars and how Brix increases as we increase soil health. And, you know, I was wondering if I picked up a piece of ground that wasn't where it needed to be soil health-wise, could I help that plant along? So we started experimenting with different forms of sugars. We've started using liquid molasses and cold processed sugars. We've been spraying about 1 pound to the acre and doing trials. Anytime we're applying sugar on beans, we're seeing about 3 to 4 bushel increases. And then we also started monitoring the Brix levels. Our check strip in an unhealthy field, this is a no-till field, was 5.2. Where we used molasses, our Brix went to 15.6. And if we used generic white table sugar or cold process, we were at 34 to 36 on our Brix. You know, then we had an agronomist go out there and start doing net sweeps. Our neighbors were fighting grasshoppers, stink bugs, kudzu bugs, aphids. We were not seeing any of those that met threshold where we had to spray. So for $1 an acre, I was able to deter some of the insects that we were going to have to fight that year. That was a pretty cheap program. And then I met this gentleman. If you don't know him, his name is Ray Stiers. He's from North Carolina. I believe that's a AGCO 6070 model. It was made before I was. Ray got in bad health one year, and I wasn't farming that many acres. He asked me if I'd come help him plant a corn crop. And, you know, as a young farmer, all the information I was given was about equipment, you know, precision planting, picket row fence stands, you know, down pressure, delta force. And so I'm out here helping Ray plant his corn with a plate planter. I stayed up all night learning how to put graphite talc and everything in a plate planter. I was worried to death. And I'm riding on the back, and I started noticing, you see that spring right there? Every one of them was broke except for that one. There was one spring out of 8. And I asked Ray, I said, Ray, did you know your down pressure springs were broken? And he said, yeah. I said, well, when did that happen? He said, sometime back in the 80s. You know, this guy hasn't used synthetic nitrogen in over 20 years. He hadn't used phosphorus in over 25. He grows 150 bushel corn year in, year out. And I had just spent, after, you know, right before I helped him plant his corn, I just spent about $25,000, $30,000 on a planter with VSET, V-Drive, you know, Delta downforce, 2020 monitors, and he's putting me to shame with something that doesn't even have down pressure springs. So, you know, the moral of the story is don't let equipment be your holdup. You know, there may be some stuff you may have to modify, manufacture, make what you want to be on your operation, but it'll all work. I had somebody bet me $200 that I couldn't make a cover crop roller for less than $100. I'm a gambling man. So we took the bet. I went to Tractor Supply. That's an 8-inch creosote fence post, and it was hanging from 2 pieces of chains, and it rolled cover crops for about 600 acres before a chain broke. Needless to say, I made some money. Then we went to these. I really wanted something where I could roll and crimp and maybe get away from some of our burn down herbicides. So we saw a Yetter Stalk Devastator for a corn head at a farm show one time, and I said, what kind of bar does that mount on? He said about a 2.5 to 2 1/4. And I said, man, that'll work. So we actually took them. We didn't modify anything. We just bolted these things straight up. There's a down pressure spring here where we can apply pressure. The only thing we did was we filled the gap here where the rebar wasn't, and that gave us a crimp consistently across that whole roller bar. Nobody made the planter that I wanted to have, so we actually built these extensions. I made a 20-inch row, 8-row planter, and we've got a 2x2 and in-furrow system on there. We've cut our fertilizer. You'll see some numbers coming up, but just to give you an idea, we saved about $70,000 on fertilizer last year using the Haney Test versus conventional. And one of the ways we were able to do it was just, you know, precision, putting it where we're going. So this is a picture outside of my tractor. Like I said, if you've never stared that down before, it can give you some anxiety. We have GPS now because you can't see the other end of the field. This is just a little video of last year when we were planting. We plant into everything green and standing now. When I first started farming, you know, the co-op wanted to come out and spray at least 100 acres. And the problem of it was if anything broke, it would, you know, typically be a week or 2 before we could get back out there. May not play. Nope. Sorry. So this is where we're at now. We finally got a nice tractor. I went to Club John Deere. So we've had orange, green, blue tractors. As long as they sit nice, I don't care. So this is what it looks like after we've planted. Notice we've got 100% cover. All of our fields typically have slope to them. Anywhere that we farm in Catawba County, our Iredale ground is a little bit flatter. But this is a 10-acre field, and it's probably, you know, like I said, you can see complete ground cover. So the first 2 years I farmed, we farmed with GMO corn. I have nothing against GMOs. It's just a tool that I don't need on my farm. And so I told my seed corn salesman that we were going to plant non-GMO. We had a market for it. And he explained to me how every rootworm, wireworm, cutworm, I didn't know there were that many worms in the world. But he said that they're going to come in there and decimate my crop. And I called a friend up about it. My friend said, have you ever seen a U-Haul of worms moving down the road before? And I said, nope. And he said, well, if you ain't had them, you probably ain't going to get them. So this is the first non-GMO corn crop we raised. To give you an idea, back home, corn's about $4 a bushel right now. Non-GMO corn's anywhere from 7 to 9. So that's why we grow non-GMO. I've won the state yield contest with the non-GMO corn. It yields well, just as good for us, and the only difference is if I have a grass issue, I spray Steadfast Q. If I would have had Roundup Ready corn, it would have been Roundup. We just haven't needed those tools. So this is what it looks like. This was our yield plot corn. It was kind of a neat thing to me. Gabe Brown came to my farm 2 years ago and said it was the tallest corn he ever seen before, so that was kind of a, little pick-me-up. This is Michael Thompson. If you've never met Michael Thompson, he's about 6'10", I believe, and that's the ear. We've got stuff that's setting ears above his head. It's good for silage corn too. We've had some dairies that needed some silage before an emergency. We've let them chop some of it. Then we started talking about, did anybody read the article last year that they said they found a corn that was producing its own nitrogen? Anybody read that? From down in I think it's New Mexico somewhere, or Arizona. Well, we've noticed the same thing on ours. I've never tested it to see if that bacteria was in these crown roots, but how many times have you ever walked your field and seen stuff like that? Pay attention. That's the plant feeding the biology feeding the plant. It's free nutrients. Then we started noticing mushrooms. This corn here, that farm we've been farming for about 4 or 5 years now. You can see we've got 100% ground cover. Corn's coming up nicely through it. Our typical nitrogen application on corn is 60 units. That's growing anywhere from 150 to 200 bushel corn with 60 units of nitrogen. And this year we've cut back even further to 30. So we had a field day. There's Crazy Ray again, looking at the cover crops. You can see, corn, we're pretty much getting to tassel. And this is the difference. The one on the right was taken in a 7-way cover crop blend. The one on the left was in no-till with no covers. That was the only difference. Fertilizer program was the same, no fungicides, no insecticides. But look at the difference in the kernel depth. You heard earlier that, we're part of a distillery. When that distillery got started, I went over there. My grandpa Hedrick side, they made moonshine. My grandpa Hedrick side, they made brandy, so I knew a little bit about liquor. And I told them that my corn would make more alcohol per run than anybody else's. They told me I was crazy. Needless to say, I supply all the grains now. We're seeing 62 to 64 pound test weights in the corn. We've had it tested. It's got higher beta carotenes and all the things that I have no idea what they mean, but they're better for people. And they make good liquor. So, this is the difference. Like I said, those 2 corn ears, they were about 6 feet apart. We just simply bent them over. This was my neighbor's corn at the same time. This is a no-till system with high amounts of chicken litter and manures. This was taken same time, same day, Ray came out. His soil temperatures were at 94 degrees, 2 inches deep during the middle of the day. Ours average about 70, 75. His made 5 to 9 bushels, ours makes about 150. We'll go through about 4 weeks of heat and drought and everybody burns up. So we are connected to the foods we eat. I know you heard Chris talk earlier a little bit, but just look at the nutrient deficiencies that we're seeing. That triangle, that food triangle we saw as children, it said you needed 6 servings of vegetables. Well, that was back from the 40s. So if you take a decline in copper at 76%, you need to multiply that by 3. That's how much we need now just to get the same nutrients we did back in the 40s. Why aren't we paying attention to this? When we soil sample, we look at 20 different micro and macronutrients. So we started doing on-farm testing. We found a company called AquaSpy. They make a probe that goes in the ground 48 inches, and every 4 inches we're monitoring temperature, root depth, water infiltration, rates, and depth, and we're also monitoring when the crop uses the water. So these are our 2 probes. You can see how close they are to one another. They're about 15 feet apart, and to be that close, we had some pretty staggering differences. You can see here where we had rainfall. The rainfall made it about 20 inches deep where we had no covers. Where we had cover crops, we were going down in the profile about 44 inches. Where I'm at in North Carolina, we have a natural hard pan about 18 to 20 inches. This is not, this was what we thought it would be. We're starting to see cover crops break up that natural hard pan, change the bulk density in the soils. We're seeing moisture go deeper. We're seeing root growth go deeper. We can actually track what's going on. The neat thing to me is for 3 years now we've been using this program, and corn uses its moisture at 3 a.m. in the morning. I have nobody who's told me why yet, but consistently we can see where it's coming out of the profile and what time the corn's using the moisture. So what do we see? Our available moisture with cover crops, even after having to produce that cover crop, we actually gained about 7 to 9 inches of moisture by reducing evaporation and transpiration in the plant. We also saw roots were deeper in the zone. We were actually cooler by 6 to 8 degrees average. We applied 100 pounds less nitrogen where we had cover crops, and we yielded substantially more. So we'll talk a little bit about that. This is what the graph looks like for the corn. That black line just shows every time the moisture is being used by the crop in a rainfall event. But notice the bottom one, what happened to those rainfall events? In the summertime, when it was 100 degrees, the ground got hot, crusted over, and the rain just didn't infiltrate into the soil profile. Then we also saw temperature changes. We were actually warmer in the springtime where we could plant faster with cover crops, and then we stayed more consistent. We didn't have the high peaks and the high valleys, so we actually were able to keep those temperatures more consistent, which was better for the crop. And this is our yield map. Where we had cover crops on the left, we yielded 208 bushels. Where we didn't, we yielded 187. The thing that really caught my attention is the bleed through. There were a couple rows from the line where we were actually getting some bleed through from the moisture in the plants from the cover crop that were showing up. And then we start looking at nitrogen on our farm. You know, why as farmers are we applying 1 unit of nitrogen for every bushel of corn? So this is what they show us from the university. I think, you know, I hate to talk bad about them. I don't mean it in a negative way, but the universities, as a farmer for me, they've been failing me. They're giving me data that doesn't show all the stuff. So it says here if you apply 0 units of nitrogen, you can make 100 bushels of corn, but it says optimum is 150. Well, we ask for the data points. Those are the data points. I mean, look at all the variation that they have in there. You know, there's a reason that we're able to make 100 bushels of corn with no nitrogen. I want to figure out how to make about 200 with none. So then we started working with NC State University. How many farmers in here pull your soil samples? How many pull them, say, 4 to 6 inches deep? Anybody? So I used to do that, but my corn grows roots 3 feet deep. Depends on your water table, I understand that, but we're not farming a flower pot. Why are we pulling 6-inch samples? So the university agreed to come out and pull 12 and 24-inch samples on our farm. And what we found out is the potassium, the phosphorus, the sulfur, the zinc, boron, all of it's moving more in the profile as I'm increasing aggregation. So if I'm pulling samples at 4 inches, it's only going to show 100 pounds of potassium. But if I go down to 12 inches, I pick up another 100 pounds. I've got enough there for a crop now at 12 inches instead of 4 inches telling me to apply fertilizers. Why are we doing that? Start pulling deeper samples, see what's in that soil profile. And then we started getting introduced to the Haney Test. We started introducing his tests on our farm in 2013. Rick uses water and root exudates instead of hydrochloric acids or something like they would use in Milic 1 or Milic 3. And so what Rick does also is he looks at the organic forms of nitrogen that we've identified as being available to the plants. So for 200 bushel corn, Rick said I needed 74 units. Whereas the university test that I sent to NC State said I needed 250 units of nitrogen. As a farmer, would you rather apply 74 or 250? I'm cheap. I want to keep my money. So then we did these trials. And what I want you to pay attention to is rep number 2. Rep number 2 was our conventional tillage, and reps number 1, 3, and 4 were no-till with cover crops. So what yielded the least with no fertilizer? Rep number 2. And every time we applied fertilizer, it increased. And that's because when we tilled it and introduced that oxygen, all the bacteria started eating the organic matter. We didn't have any reserves for that crop to grow. But look right here. On reps 1, 3, and 4, we grew 130, 155, and 180 units, 100 bushels of corn with no nitrogen at all. And they were fairly consistent as they moved across. So this is what Rick does. He shows us our organic carbon levels, shows us our CO2 burst. When we first started, our CO2 bursts were probably 80s and 90s. Now we're seeing 4s and 500s. We started tracking organic carbon, may have been in the 20s and 30s on some of our fields. Now we're seeing some 2s and 300s. So we know that we're getting the benefit from their leaving the crop residue, integrating cattle and livestock, and also the cover crops. So when you do a university test, that's all you're getting is nitrate nitrogen. When you do Rick's test, we're getting the nitrate nitrogen plus all the amino acid forms, about 23 of them. So this is what Rick's test does. It gives you the blue, where the university only gives you the red. So now we've got a complete circle. We know how to make our nitrogen recommendations. So if the soil is alive, why do we treat it like dirt? How do we manage it? And what tools do we have to manage it? Those are some of the questions that Rick asked to me. So this is what we did. We applied 250 units of nitrogen in our university trial. We did 125, and then based on Rick's recommendation, we did 0 nitrogen, none at all. And this was the difference between all 3 replications. So we actually yielded 9 bushels better with 250 units of nitrogen. That's all. We gained 9 bushels of corn. So where we applied no nitrogen at all, we lost that 9 bushels. At $4 corn, it's only $36 an acre. On that nitrogen alone, I spent about $110. So to me, by applying no nitrogen to that farm, we actually saved about $100 an acre. So looking at farming for profit, not for yield, everybody gets hung up on the yield. I mean, I like the big bushels, I like the big yields, they're fun too, but at the same time, I want to make money. So we didn't post-spray 500 acres of corn, we didn't post-spray 400 acres of beans this year. Our chemical savings on that was about $19,800. And then looking at the Haney Test, we saved about $22,000 on phosphorus, $14,000 on potassium, and $34,000 on nitrogen. So my farm saved a little over $91,000 this year just by using a new soil sample. Is Rick's test always accurate? No. The thing that you've got to understand with Rick's test is it's based on environment. So in 2015, when we went into a drought, before we did our top dress nitrogen, we pulled another sample. Just understand, if you go into a drought or a dry spell, the biology in the ground can't break down that biomass and release those nutrients that we thought they were going to. So we had to add about another 20 pounds of nitrogen at our top dress. And that's what really, made a difference for us. So just understand that it is very fluid. So this was our contest yield corn. That corn right there is Reed's Yellow Dent. If you're not familiar with it, it's about from 1845 So we've been growing this now for 3 years. That ear right there is 20 round and 42 long. We applied 120 units of nitrogen to this farm. It made 318.15 bushels. And that's dry land. That's with nothing added. We pulled stalk nitrate samples, tissue samples. My limiting factor was water. Had I had irrigation, I think it would have went higher. And we didn't even try to grow that. It was just, the stars aligned, we had good rainfall. So this is my county extension agent, Durr. She came out for the yield trial, and that's where we ended up, 318.15. If you've never seen corn like that, there ain't a deer or a case in the world that wants to take that out of the field. It literally sounded like thunder running through the combine. I mean, that's probably one of the most exciting fields I've ever harvested before. But think about your management as a farmer. Like this year, we've got one farm. The university hasn't put the data together yet, but we're looking at nitrogen efficiency in the plant. So the plant can take up, ammonical, it can take up nitrate nitrogen, but it has to convert it in the plant. And while it's converting it in the plant, it's using nutrients and resources. So what we found is where we're supplying our nitrogen based off of a cover crop that's already plant available, we're saving about 7 to 9 inches of moisture. And that's just based off of using 150 units of nitrogen. If you're putting more than 150 units of nitrogen synthetically out there, then you're actually using more water than that. So that's pretty huge for us on dry land. So how do we measure all this? On our farm, we do stalk nitrate samples. How many farmers in here do stalk nitrate samples? Anybody? There's a few hands. Why aren't we pulling these? It's kind of like a report card at the end of the year. If you're using nutrients, why don't you make sure you're using them properly? So we go out there with a pair of cutters and a measuring tape. We measure up 6 inches and pull a 10-inch sample. We send it into the lab about 2 weeks after black layer. If you remember those plots, we had 250 units of nitrogen, 125, and 0. And like I said before, even where we put no nitrogen, we were still excessive. We've got so much nitrogen built up between organic matter and the legumes in our cover crop mix and the cows integrated into the farm. We just don't need those nutrients anymore. And it varies from year to year. So this was our trial. We averaged 176 to 318 bushels. We placed first. Our cost per bushel on corn is $1.45. By growing open pollinated heirloom varieties of corn, I can clean my own seed, I can save it, and I can replant it. That's $100 an acre easy out of the equation. And then by cutting out chemicals and some of our fertilizers, it's pretty cheap. Just to give you an idea, my county average on corn is 110 bushels. So we chased the combine with the drill. Everybody used to tell me I had to manage my residue. We had to bush hog it or turbo till it in. We don't do any of that anymore. We simply, as the combine's picking, we have somebody else running our no-till drill through the corn stalks, planting a cover. I finally went from a 7-foot, if you didn't know, when I started farming with a 7-foot drill. It's a lot of turns in 1,000 acres. This year we updated to a 15-foot John Deere. I actually like it a little bit better than my Great Plains. It's a little bit less soil disturbance. Then we started integrating cattle. Like I said, we don't have enough cows to rotate on every acre every year, so we kind of pick and choose and move them as we can. And as some of our landlords don't like cattle, so they don't want them on all our farms. But if we have open land after small grain, we'll do paddocks of warm season mixes, and we'll rotate them around and then come back with either another cover crop or small grain that fall. Then we started growing Katadhin hair sheep. Anybody in here grow sheep? One thing that I learned with sheep is if the wind blows, they die. They would be terrible in North Dakota. I know the wind the other day when I came in. Sheep will teach you life lessons. And finding good genetics is the key. Don't buy sheep off Craigslist. I no longer own any sheep, if you didn't know. Cows, I like my cows. Pigs are my favorite. These are my pigs. We started raising Berkshires. We started with 14. I think we've gotten up to about 50. So typically our rotation is, say we harvest corn early. We can plant a cover crop. We can flash graze some cows across it and then bring the pigs back. And if we had any corn out the back of the combine or what the cows left, pigs pick up. They're pretty smart animals. Then we started growing open pollinated bloody butcher corn. I do know it is from 1845. We grind it up in the grits and corn mill. I know a lot of people don't think it's easy to direct market, but just to give you an idea, one day we just ground these up, started sending them to restaurant 1 pound packs, and now we sell it for $5 a pound. You do $5 a pound times 56 pounds in a bushel, it's pretty profitable. And you know, start looking at this stuff. Hauling stuff to an elevator, you're gonna go broke. You cannot make money right now, hardly. I mean, if you do, you're really crunching your numbers. But this bloody butcher corn, it also makes really good bourbon. That's a picture of our distillery and some of our barrels. We've been barreling now for 4 years. We've won some awards, you know, San Francisco Gold Spirit Awards. We've been to New York a few times. If anybody wants sample, I always travel with bourbon. Then we started looking at the cover crops we were using. I was having to ship cover crop seed to me that had already been blended. That just added in freight. I was starting to grow small grain on my farm, and instead of getting $4.50, $5 for a bushel of wheat, I can grow more bushels of triticale than I can wheat. I can clean it and sell it for $12.50 wholesale and $15 retail. Why didn't we start doing that? So we built a 50 by 80 building on the farm. That is a seed cleaner from Kingman, Kansas. They took the wood from the Santa Maria Pinto or whoever Christopher Columbus came over and built a seed cleaner out of it. And it's worked well. We've been cleaning with it for 3 years now. We've got a gravity table, a weigh hopper to batch. We've got a 10,000 pound mixer and then a bagging system. You know, we put all this stuff in the building on our own, a couple grain legs, and we've been cleaning and grading seed for our farm and other farmers in the area for a couple years now. You know, just so everybody understands, you know, we went through a drought in 2015, my 3rd year of farming. And if we wouldn't have had, you know, 4 or 5 other enterprises that we were seeing income come in from, we would have been in a really tight spot. So really look at, you know, it doesn't have to be hard to diversify your operation. There's Facebook. We sell our cows on Facebook now for $5 a pound. The only thing we do is we get the people's money, we take it to the processor, and they go pick their beef up. It's something that simple. We do the same thing with our pigs. We get $7 a pound for sausage. So no one farmer or company, conservation group, government entity can scale soil health on its own. You know, we've got to work together to connect every link for the food supply chain. Increasingly, you know, you always see everybody on Facebook, Twitter, every social media account, they want to know who the farmer is. And really the only thing you've got to do is take 15 minutes and give them the story. You know, if you tell them about your operation, you know, the best line I've ever heard was from Gabe Brown. And somebody asked him if, you know, if he would be an animal on his farm, you know, what kind of life would he have? And Gabe said, 1 great life, 1 bad day. I have stole that phrase so many times, and people really do resonate with that. You know, just little simple things like that can be the difference between making $1.50 a pound at a sale or $5 a pound on Facebook for the same animal. We're actually going to be doing another class. It's going to be January the 15th to the 17th if anybody's interested. We're really focusing on nutrient management, some of the things you've heard today, but it'll be more in depth with some of our tissue samples and soil samples and stuff that we're pulling. But it's me, Gabe, Ray, and Buzz Clute. If you'd be interested in that, you can get a hold of any of us. And find a farmer that's doing these practices, ask questions. The time for change is now. They're not saying commodity prices are going to go up. They're saying they're going to go down. Fertilizer prices are already higher this year than they were last year. It's really not hard. When I started this, I started on 25% of my acres. And yeah, my 25% is probably less than everybody else's. But, just start small on your farm and increase this stuff as you can manage it. And my information's at the bottom here. If anybody's got any questions, you can call, text, or email me, and I'll be glad to answer. Have I ran over? Am I doing pretty good? All right. Does anybody have any questions? Anything that I can answer?
Yeah, I didn't but you said something real quick about water use, adding more nitrogen throughout the summer. What was that stat that you made there that it was?
So the question was on the water use, how much plants are using water. And so what this study is we did a 7-way cover crop mix, and we pulled a Haney test, and that mix said that we had produced about 150 pounds of organic nitrogen. And so we took that full credit of 150 pounds. And then right beside of it, these are 2 10-acre plots. I don't like the little 20 by 20 foot plots. We do 5, 10 acres if we can. So we had no nitrogen, which was 150 units from the cover crop. And then in the other 10 acres, we applied 150 pounds of synthetic. It was 32%, so it was a little bit of ammoniacable and nitrate nitrogen, and that's what was on this plot. And the difference is the plants where we use synthetic nitrogen, the plants take that synthetic nitrogen up and they actually convert it inside of the plant to an amino acid. And it takes resources to do that. And what we found is we utilized about 7 to 9 inches of moisture out of the soil profile where we applied the synthetic forms of nitrogen because of that plant conversion, either through transpiration, evaporation, or just the plant having to utilize it to convert a synthetic to an organic form of nitrogen. Whereas where we had no synthetic nitrogen, we had 7 to 9 more inches of moisture to go towards yield instead of conversion. And we're getting ready to harvest those plots, and we'll have the yield data, but just looking at the moisture conservation alone, that's pretty huge. And I'm trying to get a university to give me a better breakdown that's farmer friendly that I can understand on how that conversion works. So that was the difference in those plots. Yes, sir.
You talked about the bricks test and we're applying sugar on your crop. When would you do that? Before you make any pressure or at a certain stage?
So the question is about the bricks. We were talking about the bricks levels in the plants and if we would apply the sugar before we saw a pest or an issue that we needed it. We're putting about 1/2 pound of sugar in furrow in a liquid solution. I've already got it on the planter. It's about 50 cents an acre. And if we have to go over the top for any reason, we can actually put another 1/2 pound in there, or I can just go spray sugar on its own. Typically, we check corn around V4 to V6. If we know that some pests come in about that time, if I've got time, it's $1 an acre for me to apply that sugar, we go ahead and apply it. Because typically we see those same pests year in and year out based on what our neighbors do. On soybeans, if we don't have an issue going through the season, we typically spray sugar anyways at pod set. We've seen the yield to justify, if we're picking up 3 or 4 bushels and we're just putting $1 an acre worth of sugar out there, and plus whatever it is for our fuel. I mean, we've got our own sprayer. You got to take into account that, but it's very minimal. But yeah, we about 1 pound a year on every acre. And like I said, you saw the bricks where we were seeing them anywhere from about 30 to 35. Corn is a lot different. Those were beans. If you're spraying it on corn and you're seeing that vegetation stage really take off and the corn growing, it's going to use that sugar up quicker. So it's not going to be in the plant quite as long as what we're seeing in beans or cotton. Yes, ma'am. So the question was if we leased all our acres, if we own any. We've been fortunate enough that we've been able to buy some. To give you an idea, land in our area sells anywhere for about $12,000 to $15,000 an acre. It's really heavy in commercial right now. The largest two farms that we had in our county, one of them just went to solar panels and the other one just went to an industrial park. So we do lease, I think I've got 24 or 25 landlords right now that we lease from, and then we own 3 of our farms. So it's a lot of Christmas cards. A lot of Christmas cards.